I'm going to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Gunai Kanai people of East Gippsland, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and also to other First Nations across this continent. And as I said a few times before at the beginning, I guess I like reading in your book how First Nations are particularly affected by the housing crisis or the housing disaster, as you say in your book. So I think it's important always to acknowledge that that is a important issue that we need to address as well for to address justice with First Nations people. I want to say a couple of things about you first, just to introduce the conversation, and I'm just gonna read your bio from the small book. Hi there, Kate. How's it going? We just started, so you're right on time. I might just
Thank you. Hi.
Change the presenter view so we can see. There we go. Yeah. And maybe. All right. And so Kevin Bell is a baby boomer who grew up in social housing in the Melbourne suburb of Moorabbin. Fittingly, in the languages of the Bunurong, Moorabbin means resting place or mother's milk. He graduated in arts and law from Monash University and worked at the Tenants Union of Victoria before practicing as a barrister for 20 years, including in Victorian housing and residential tenancies law. As a judge of the Supreme Court of Victoria for 15 years, he wrote many influential judgments on human rights, including the right to housing and home. As a professor in the Faculty of Law at Monash University and director of the Caston Centre for Human Rights Law, he similarly focused on housing, homelessness, and human rights. He also served as a commissioner of the Europe Justice Commission and has a master's in international human rights law from Oxford University. He's presently an adjunct professor at Monash and the patron of Tenants Victoria. I think it's definitely the most distinguished guest that we've had in our meetings. And just to give a bit of a background, Kevin, we've been meeting for about 9 months. We're a group of concerned citizens that live in East Gippsland, and we've come together from different perspectives, but with the I guess the will to try to find solutions at the local level to the housing crisis, and try to kind of bring together the community to address some of the solutions, and also to kind of open up conversations and disseminate information. And we've been doing these sessions, as I said, for about 9 months. We try to have a guest speaker every month to learn and to then discuss. And we've had slow but steady progress in different ways, including engaging with council officers. And currently we have a petition online to I guess to demand the council that they put housing affordability front and center. I read your small book, but it's a small book, but it's full of great content, and I think it really summarizes really well the context of the current housing crisis, and and you offer this a human rights perspective on this issue. And I think that that's a very interesting perspective, and we would like to hear a bit more, maybe about, of course, like you have had a really long career, but in maybe what brought you to write this book, and what are you aiming to do with the publishing of this book?
Thank you for that question. Is that you, Isaac, that was speaking?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Yeah, that's me,
Yeah,
Isaac.
thank you, Isaac. Isaac, I'm getting about every second word, but I am following what you're saying, and I'm just concerned to know whether you're hearing me. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear. So hopefully,
okay.
hopefully
Well, I understand your question. Your question was what brought me to write the book, and what was my purpose in doing so. What brought me to write the book was a sense that my generation had breached trust with younger generations, that we enjoyed a system of housing which was supported by government, based on the idea that housing was a human right, at a time when Australia was coming out of World War II, in which circumstances I grew up, and it was possible in those days for working people, including working poor people, who my parents were, and people on government benefit, to have housing and to have a secure place in which to live and in which to grow up. Gradually, over a period of 50 years, that situation radically changed, and everybody at your meeting, Isaac, will be very conscious of how difficult it is to obtain housing, to keep housing, and particularly is that so for the younger generation or two who are coming into a housing system which makes it very difficult indeed for them to obtain housing. So I was conscious of all of that, and I felt that it was important for me to say something about it from the perspective of somebody who had enjoyed a different kind of housing, and who had, well, I've got 3 children, and they're all going through issues associated with housing, and of course my working history is one that has brought me into close contact with housing issues. So I was very conscious of what had happened and what the impact of it was. You opened with a warm introduction that included an acknowledgement of country, and I share in that welcome. Recently, as a Royal Commissioner with the York Justice Commission, I was at Lake Tyers last year before I left the Commission, and I was staying at Lake's Entrance, and the people at the meeting said to me that homelessness in Lake's Entrance was terrible, and if I just went back one street, I'd be seeing young people with backpacks on their back, and they were homeless people. And that's exactly what I did, and that's exactly what I saw. So, you know, the homelessness aspect of this is shocking. 120,000 people in Australia homeless in the land of plenty is a big number, and not getting better. My purpose in writing the book was to suggest that that we have a serious system design problem in this country, and there's a lot wrong with it. Mostly it's organised along small government and private sector lines, by which I mean the government's responsibility has gradually become small. That's a big part of the problem. It needs to increase to be about 10% of the housing provision from less than 3%. And on the other side of things, we've got a system that's mainly driven by housing as conceived as a commodity rather than as a home for people. I'm not running down the private sector as the main driver for the provision of housing. That would be counterproductive. But I am criticising the way in which the system is regulated, and it's not regulated on the basis that housing is a right of everybody, but rather on the basis that it's a commodity to be traded like anything else. That's linked with colonisation because that was the system that was brought here at colonisation. So my purpose in writing the book was to suggest that there is another way of thinking about housing, which is one which respects the right that everybody possesses to housing by virtue of their humanity, because you can't live in dignity without having housing. And the correlation of that, the other side of the coin, is that governments are responsible for bringing that about by designing the system in a way that ensures that everybody has access to housing. So that was what brought me to write the book, Isaac, and that was the purpose that I had in doing so.
Thank you. One of the things that that struck me when you described it very succinctly, but in terms of when you're talking about the housing system in Australia, it is divided in 4 parts. And
yes,
you talk about home ownership, private rental housing, social housing, and homelessness. Can you maybe, because I guess like I had never thought about homelessness as also being part of this system, but of course that's what you're saying.
Absolutely, yes. Well, again, I thank you for that question, and indeed for having me. It's wonderful to be talking with your group. I'm sorry I can't be there personally, but Bairnsdale's a hell of a way away from me. But modern technology means that we can meet. I do know Bairnsdale well. I spent a lot of time there, and so I'm conscious of the kind of community that you represent. Now, I think the key word here is system. The reason why I approach the housing system in this helicopter way, looking at it from above as total, as if it were a total landscape, is because it's all connected, and the housing problems that have beset us as a community are problems which are inherent in all parts of it. Now, I do want to start with homelessness, which is, and you made this point that you haven't previously seen homelessness as part of the housing system, but in fact it is in a number of ways. The most important way is that homelessness as a phenomena is a result of the structural failure of other aspects of the system, and so it's the canary in the gold mine, you might say. It's what tells us that something is terribly wrong with other aspects of the system, and of course, homelessness is not just rough sleeping, as you'll be well aware, though it is that. It's sleeping in precarious housing, in unsafe housing, in insecure housing, in housing that's not suitable for need, and so on, all of which is a kind of housing. So you have you have discrete issues that arise with respect to that segment which deserve individual analysis. Then you've got the other parts. You've got social housing, which is comprised of public housing of the kind in which I grew up and of which there is very, very little today. Pardon me. Sorry, Isaac, I'll try and get rid of this. That should help. Social housing, which is made up of public housing, government directly provided rental housing. And as I say, there's little of that today. In other countries with which we like to compare ourselves, the amount of social housing in the total housing mix is at least 10% or higher. We're down to 3%. The other aspect of social housing is community housing. I'm not sure if you've got any community housing in Bairnsdale. That's also rental housing, but provided by community housing organisations. Launch Housing in Melbourne is an example of one, but there are very many of them. That's a growing sector, and it's a good thing that it's growing, but it's growing from a very low base. And it's mainly housing for people not with special needs, but housing for people on low incomes. Then you've got the private rental housing market, which has grown to encompass about a third of Australians, which is a huge number. It's got its own discrete issues. The most important of those discrete issues is that the laws which regulate private rental housing are very soft touch, becoming stronger. In this country, it used to be possible to evict anybody without reason, and it still is in several states. Only recently in Victoria must a landlord now provide a reason for evicting somebody. That's totally inconsistent with human rights, which requires the legal system to protect the security of the tenure of the individual, whether the individual be renting from anybody, government or private, or whether they own their home or whatever. And then you've got home ownership, which counts for about 66% of housing in this country. And again, you've got discrete issues which apply there. Those issues are affordability, access, the way the tax system works, the fact that wages have not gone up at anything like the same rate as the value of housing. You used to be able to buy a home in say the 50s, 60s, or even the 70s with 3 times the value of the average wage. Now it's 8 times or 9 times, which makes it completely impossible for literally millions of people to be able to buy a home. And that just creates terrible stress in their lives and pushes them further down the housing affordability market into high rent private accommodation, or in some cases in homelessness. And so, Isaac, I'm inviting everybody to think about housing not in terms of just the one way that they might have housing. If they're a tenant, then there are issues. If they own housing or want to own a house, then there are issues. If they're in public housing, there are issues. If they're homeless, well, there are many issues. But rather to look at this in the broad and to think about the way in which human rights, based on the fundamental value of human beings as dignified beings with rights against government, to those things which they need to be fully human, to thrive as people, housing, health, employment, and so on, as applicable across the board. So my approach is, as you say, systemic.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I was. Maybe I've heard these numbers in the past, but you talk about how the housing in Australia is kind of shifted since colonization to be something where the government would invest and build
Yes,
thousands of homes, to now becoming the biggest private asset class in the country, to the value of 9.6 trillion in numbers of 2022.
correct. Yeah,
Homeowners owe, and you say in your book, 1.4 trillion in debt, which makes the Australians the world's more indebted homeowners. But also, like, what that means is like that their voting power is has a stake on that home ownership, right? So that's like
correct.
an immense sort of sway that I guess has seen, or for the lack of, the main two parties really not offer, to my point of view, like that sort of structural sort of reform that's needed. So I guess my question is like, how, or is it like that human rights approach something that can shift that?
I believe that it is something that can shift that. It Human rights is based on a wholly different premise to the current system. The current system is based on the premise that that land is property, and that it's an asset able to be traded, through which people can accumulate wealth and be comfortable through that means. And in most countries of the world, there is something of that in the system, and it's not problematic in those places where you've got strong government investment in the system, where you've got house prices rising, not at the rate that they have in this country, but at a lower rate, not going down, but going up by maybe 3 to 5%, which is a kind of norm in Europe, incidentally, rather than this skyrocketing prices that we've had in Australia. And the different premises that human rights says that people have human needs, which it is the responsibility of government to satisfy. Those needs I mentioned before. The people need work of whatever kind. They need access to health services. They need housing. They need transport. They need to be free of arbitrary interference through the exercise of state power that's not justified, the civil rights, but we're here talking about the social rights, obviously. And this approach is human-centered, not profit-centered. And so a human rights approach puts people first and makes the housing system have the purpose of meeting their needs. At the present, the housing system puts land or housing as an investment at the centre, and puts the owner or the investor, and protecting them and creating laws to enable them to invest and to accumulate wealth and to accumulate properties. That's really I think the rationale of the present system. This is all imbalanced, very imbalanced. It's internationally imbalanced. It's not the way that the things operate elsewhere, and it doesn't need to be that way here. The way that human rights would work would be that the enshrined in law, it would mean that government would have responsibility to ensure that people have access to housing. That would certainly mean that there'd need to be more government investment in housing, but it would also mean that the government would have to take a lot more interest in the way the private market worked, the way that zoning systems worked in individual areas, the way that the economy works, how much education there was of people involved in the construction of housing, because we do have a problem with supply of labour. Coming back to my systemic point, I was just about to go, through the various aspects of the system which would have to be rethought if ensuring the right of people to have housing was to be made the purpose of the system.
And I guess like the next question is like, how do we go about that, right? And I guess like I was also reading your book, learning about how in Australia there's no mention of human rights in the Constitution, or there's not a Human Rights Act. There's different states that they do. Maybe and as a human rights lawyer, you can give us a little bit of a overview of like, why is that the case? That and I think you say that it's the only sort of liberal democracy that doesn't have a human rights charter or act.
Yes.
And then how do we go about changing that?
Well, it's historical. Australia became a state in his national law terms, a nation with federation in 1901, and that's rather late. The other places which had been established with human rights based constitutions with whom we compare ourselves had them by then. Wars had been fought, there'd been conflict. The conflict was resolved internally in a way that involved the creation of a new state based on human rights, because government was seen to be something against which people needed protection, and government was seen to be something against which people were entitled to make claims. France is a good example, America is a good example, and there are others. Now, that's not our history. Where there was although of course there were wars between black people and white people, between the colonizers and the colonized, and those wars were very serious indeed in the very place where you now are. And you may have seen the Four Corners report, which included extensive coverage of the Warrigal Creek massacre down to the west of you. And so there were wars, but not of the kind of which I'm speaking. Government was not seen to be the enemy at Federation. It was seen to be the way through which the nation would be established, and through which people could achieve nationhood. And for a long time that worked. Government was a beneficial, if paternalistic, nonetheless a beneficial force in people's lives. And I note that housing was not an issue for the first half of the 20th century. The things operated very differently. There was a lot more tenancy, but tenancy was seen to be secure. And so, although there was poverty, and I'm not ignoring that, there was not as much homelessness. But in the latter half of the 20th century, things changed very, very much. Now, coming back to the human rights question, our history until recently has not brought home to the Australian community the need for human rights. And that has been brought home now. And the housing disaster, as I prefer to call it, I think brings it home very forcibly, because there is, I think, nowhere near as likely. It's not nowhere near as likely that the situation would be as it is if we were a human rights respecting country and those rights included housing as one that was government's responsibility to implement. But that's not the way it is. We have a weak charter in Victoria, which it was my honour as a judge to administer in court. And it is a help, but it needs to be made stronger. Housing is not in there. It should be. Incidentally, Will Fowles, independent MP for Ringwood, has called on the government to include housing in the charter, and that call, in my respectful opinion, should be heard, and the government should act. But in other states, except Queensland and the ACT, there is not even a charter, and in no state is there any human rights protection for housing, and we do not have a Human Rights Act at the federal level at all. So this, I think, has helped, this ignorance of human rights and this ignorance that housing is a human right has helped to create this this imbalanced situation that we now have, where people come second and profit comes first, and things are really out of balance. And the situation is grave and serious. And I think that recognising human rights and requiring them to be implemented is part of the solution.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and you mentioned a few kind of positive steps at the national level that have happened sort of more recently, more about bringing up the issue. And I guess hearing you talk about the origins of human rights charters in other places and how, I guess maybe now, or my question is, like, are the treaty negotiations or other forms of sort of treaty with First Nations, could that be an avenue as well to enshrine some of those human
Yes.
rights in Australia? Because I guess, you know, there has been still no sovereignty hasn't been ceded. And in fact, there's been wars as well in Australian soil.
Sure. There are many examples of Indigenous peoples being recognised in the constitutions of states, and as part of the settlement of the issues within the state, and I'm using the word state to mean nation or country here, human rights being introduced in order to provide them with protection, and not only them, people generally within the state being provided with protection. Most of the countries of South America have very large Indigenous populations. They've all been colonised by Europeans. And there are many constitutions which recognise these Indigenous peoples and protect their lands and treat those lands as their home place, and provide legal protection enforceable in courts of those home places. Now, that's not to say that it's all beer and skittles in South America. Far from it. There are commercial interests who want to invade upon those home places of Indigenous peoples, and they do. And the legal systems in the states concerned are not always strong enough to protect them. But if we didn't have those legal protections, that would be the place that we would need to start. And that's really what I'm saying in Australia, that we need to have these legal protections so that we can start. How strong they are is another matter, but we need them. Another example I'd give you is South Africa. You'll be aware that South Africa was colonised by the Dutch. Over time, an apartheid regime was introduced. The countries of the world supported the struggle for emancipation by the indigenous peoples of South Africa. They don't call themselves that. That's what they are, and that the national the new state of South Africa, based on a constitution which includes human rights, including the right to housing, is an example of a place where there was an internal treaty, as it were, between the white and the black population, which produced a new constitutional arrangement which included human rights. Another way of doing this is not through treaty, but through the use of the ordinary legislation. And there are many countries of the world where that's happened as well. Canada is a good example. There is legislation recognising the human right to housing, and there has been introduced legislation which requires the government to have a national action plan in order to implement it. That's new law. It's only just happened, and we'll have to wait and see how well that's gone. So, Isaac, I'd say to you and the other members of the group that the trend is definitely in the human rights direction, and the trend of coming to terms with the impact of colonisation upon Indigenous peoples is very much in the direction of treaties and like arrangements. Of course, in Victoria we've got the Europe Justice Commission, of which I was a member, happening. We've got the treaty processes happening. That's the direction. It's my hope that those processes will result, at least in Victoria, of having stronger human rights, including human rights which protect housing. But that's not the way things are going at the moment, and that's one cause of disappointment that I have. Although the First Peoples, including local First Peoples where you are calling for stronger human rights protection as part of these processes that are underway in Victoria, the government is not saying that they're going to do that, and they seem to be resistant to doing that. And so that's a problem, and it's a problem in relation to housing as well.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Jacoby. I'm just wondering, is there a thought for class action? So could homeless people or people in really insecure housing of the various forms actually do a class action to bring forward the government's idea on what human rights are?
Yep. There's one class action that's actually underway, Cheryl, and that class action has been brought by the occupants of the housing towers in Flemington, Carlton, and in two other places, because, as you know, the government unilaterally informed those occupants that the housing towers were to be pulled down, and they would have to leave, and they'd be displaced. And the class action relies upon the right in the Charter to be free of arbitrary interference with the home. So that's not a right to housing, but it is a right to be free of arbitrary interference with the home. And they are arguing that interfering without consultation with their home by saying they must leave and the homes will be pulled down is arbitrary. And that's a very interesting case. It's before Justice Richards in the Supreme Court of Victoria at the moment, and I expect it to be heard sometime this year. It is interesting to think about the role that class actions would have if we had laws on which a class action could rely. But unfortunately, we don't have those laws yet, and that's the problem. If there was a right to housing, then there could be a class action by those affected if the government did not implement it. And there should be. There should be that capability. It should be possible to go to court and seek justice because the Charter has been breached. Everybody, the human rights being law, it should be enforceable just like every other law. And the Charter does not yet confer an individual right of action upon people, although there are circumstances in which it can be enforced in courts, and I've given you an example of one of those in relation to the public housing tower case. So Cheryl, the first things first, we need laws, then enshrining the right to housing. If those laws are brought in, then people could bring a class action to enforce those laws as long as the law was enforceable in that way, as I think it should be.
Thank you. So could that be worked in reverse? So is that, like right now, it's illegal for people to squat or to house themselves in the public toilet or in the sand dunes or wherever they are, and they get moved on.
Mm.
And so a breaking said a law of being there, can it be worked backwards? So because right now it's beneficial to the government not to have a human rights law on this, because then they don't have to act on it because there's nothing to act on. But if it got brought back to, well, you can't make this illegal for these people to be there if you're not providing them somewhere to be.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. There is an asymmetry in the situation. The government refuses to introduce laws on which people can rely to get a home, but it's more than happy to use a law against people who haven't got a home.
Exactly.
That's the use of state power. That's the use of law by the state to hurt people in circumstances where the law should help people.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It's asymmetrical, and with your permission, I'm going to use that example.
Thank you.
in my own.
Yeah, there's I guess like I was just going to open it up. Now that Cheryl started anyone to ask questions. I guess that
Isaac, can I ask, has anybody got a housing story that they'd like to share with me?
Well, just quickly, I mean, myself and my partner Lulu, which is here, we live in a tiny house on wheels. Feel secure there because we're friends, we kind of family now, but we don't own the land, right? Well, we own the house, but we don't own the land. But currently in planning legislation, at least, and also here in East Gippsland, in some other places different, we are not allowed to live in the house that we own because it's deemed like a caravan, right? So I guess like there's also like that rigidity in the system of being able to allow a diversity of housing options for people to live in, and that's, I guess, part of the reason why we started also having these conversations to see if we could create that avenue for ourselves and also for other people. I see here as well, my friend Gail, she also lives in a tiny house on wheels, and we know of many other people that are opting for these more affordable options because it's kind of become, as you were saying at the beginning, such an affordable option that you need to find alternatives.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, and I agree strongly with your comment that we need many more options for people to be able to live safely, in security, and affordably. And you have found a way to do that, but the law hasn't caught up, and it should. And I'm meeting next week with a company who's involved in this way of business and is having all sorts of difficulties with the planning system. And again, human rights needs to come into this frame of reference. The system should be designed to enable this to happen rather than stand in the way of it. That's not to say that you can, pull up in the main street and live in this way in a parked place. That's not what I'm saying. But there are many. I can see many places where this can happen safely and in a good way, where relationships can build and little communities can develop and people can support each other, where that wouldn't otherwise happen. It's a beautiful thing, and human rights would say, recognize that that's a good thing, support people's choice, and make it happen. The people often say, well, what is the obligation on government to give effect to a human right? And human rights must, the government's responsibility is to respect, protect, and fulfill the human right. To respect, to protect, and fulfill the human right. There's some beautiful work that's gone on in expressing it that way. Now, the idea of respecting a human right is that people often find their own way to express their human rights. Now, take the right to housing, for example. Now, there are two individuals there, I think yourself and the person in the back there who live in tiny homes. You've found a way to have housing yourself. And so your choice about how you express your own human rights should be respected. And it's not as if you're asking the government for anything. You've actually gone and done it. And yet the government is not respecting that choice that you've made, expressing your own human rights by providing a system within which that can happen legally and peaceably. And so I'd give the very thing that you've done as an example of how human rights can help. Because if I were had somebody from government sitting here right now, I'd say, well, look, respect the choice that these people have made and create a legal system within which it's okay. But that's not the way things happen quite so much.
Hi, Moreau. Around the back here. Hi.
Hi, I can see you.
I was just in this coming election, it's the first one where baby boomers won't be in the majority.
Yeah.
Do you think that gives us a bit of hope, maybe, because it's in the baby boomers' interest, or what they're used to, is why well, it's not totally why we're there, but it certainly has benefited us enormously. And just a program today I listened to on The Big Idea, they pointed out that many politicians own more than 3 or 4 houses.
Yeah, they do.
I
Yeah.
mean, it seems like the difference between that and the average person, not just the politicians, but the extremely wealthy people in Australia, the Great Divide is a really scary thing that's happening. But I'm hoping that maybe with the demise of baby boomers, but to me, education, and you're talking about the human rights, we've got to teach people that that's a right. Like the people have got to change their mind about what at the moment, people look down on social housing.
Yeah.
They scorn it. And so we've got to change our whole attitude in terms of how we view it, I think.
I agree with you. And what you've just said, I think, is part of the reason that that the millennials and the other generations coming don't know much about human rights, and why would they? Because they haven't grown up in a country where it's the norm, and they've grown up in a country where the market dominates the housing system, and they've had to struggle to make do in that system, and nobody's telling them that they've got a right to housing or a right to make demands upon government to change the system. Rather, they've just had to make the best they can of a system that's failing them and not working. And so education is, I think, a key. That's one of the reasons I was really happy to speak with you today, because I believe strongly in the role of education. We need to understand what rights are and how they work before that we can make claims on government to go into to organise things in this way. Yeah, I can only but agree. We're at the stage of foundation laying. This is going to take a generation or two to fix. I am really encouraged by the independents. David Pocock's on board. He's a remarkable individual. Kailia Ting in Sydney. Will Fowles, the Teals, I think, who may have the balance of power, will be an interesting force in this situation. There are bodies of thought within both the major parties, Labor and Liberal, which are pro-human rights and pro-housing as a human right. So it's not as if we're at rock bottom. By no means. The book that I wrote was very well received, and I was absolutely run off my feet last year. So people are hungry for ideas because they recognise the gravity of the problem, and they're genuinely interested in human rights as a possible solution. But we need to the government didn't come out and say, well, yeah, we'll go down the human rights path, but we have to keep working on them.
Hello, my name's Andrew Gowland. I'm an ex-Moorabbin Tech student from 1974. So yeah, no neck of the woods.
But can you, Moorabbin Tech, was it?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I know it well.
Of course you do. Recently, after looking after my autistic son for 17 years, in which case, bye-bye career, became volunteer, but the place I was living in got sold off. I don't have the money to buy. And if I use the money to rent, I can't buy further down the track. I'm in the middle. I've been lucky. I've got a friend that had a spare bedroom, and I'm boarding with them at present. Not completely what I want, but it will have to do for now. So that's my situation. And yeah, I rather like what you're saying. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that with me. My mind is just thinking, how do you have a longer term plan, or are you really facing a situation in which the options are few?
My mum is on her last legs. Half a house in Inverloch is going to come my way, and at that time I will buy.
Yes.
Unless, of course, the people of Australia decide to do something stupid like go for nuclear, in which case I'm out of here.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I'm glad that that particular circumstance gives you an option, but I must reflect on how grave your situation would be if you did not have that option. And when I do radio programs and the open mic comes on, normally one program out of two, somebody rings up, being a person of a certain age, saying that they've been forced to live in their car because of precisely the circumstances that you're confronting, which I think is absolutely outrageous way to treat people who've made a contribution to society throughout their working life. And it's a fundamental breach of their human rights, and that's one of the reasons I'm so concerned to promote solutions to this problem. Isaac, unfortunately, I'm going to have to go pretty soon because my wife is coming home. But if there was a question from that woman there, I'm happy to take it. Yep.
Okay, that woman is Gail. And I'm also live in a tiny house on a friend's property, but it's a bit insecure because they will sell at some point, and I will never be able to afford a house. I think there are a lot of women my age and older in the same situation, especially who have separated or divorced later in life for all sorts of reasons. So I think there's a big cohort of men and women in a particularly vulnerable situation, I think.
There are.
But you know, there are two things I just wanted to mention. One was another housing story. I worked for the council at a caravan park for about a year, and we witnessed a lot of homelessness. So a lot of people coming in, families coming in to live in tents and caravans in the caravan parks. You saw it up close every single day. A guy bought one of the permanent little cabins that was there to move on to a block of land. He does actually have it, Orbost. And the council made it almost impossible for him to do that. In the end, he sort of did it by stealth. And that goes back to what you were saying before about someone having a solution and having worked it out, and yet the rules saying, and he had no money, and he did all the work himself, and you know, just the terrible family story and all the rest of it. But he was still like trying to fight his way through the system, and it's not good enough. Well, the other question I had just quickly was international law. So Australia is a signatory to the International Covenant on Social and Economic and Cultural.
Yes.
And part of that is housing. Part of that is access to affordable, secure, and something else housing. And I was just wondering if there's any, you know, we're a signatory to it. Is there any way we can use that to begin a sort of a national campaign for a national Bill of Rights?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. The way international law works, not just in Australia but everywhere, is that it's enforceable at the international level, which means The Hague, but not at the domestic level unless the country concerned brings that law home to their country. Now, we've brought in Victoria, for example, we've brought the other covenant, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is what the Charter is. That's been brought home to Victoria, and that's been made the law of Victoria, and you can enforce that to a degree. Not strongly enough, but you can do it, and it's helpful. Short of that being done, it's still law. It's still international law, and the book is based on that. There are several ways that you can use international law. You can make complaints to a committee in Geneva, which will investigate it. There have been many examples of that happening, and strong judgments have been issued by this committee, which is really a tribunal, which attract publicity to the concern and a part of the way that one can campaign about it. You can make a complaint to the Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, and that Special Rapporteur will investigate. You can ask the Special Rapporteur to come and visit, and that the Special Rapporteur will. So there are ways that you can use the law in the campaigning sense, the international law in the campaigning sense, but it doesn't get you what you need against the government as a right until it's brought home, and that's what I argue should happen. But Isaac, if it's okay, I'm going to finish up now.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Kevin, for your time and for sharing your expertise. And I think it's great to at least have this kind of positive avenue that we can aspire. I guess something that now we surely we'll discuss amongst ourselves. But thanks so much again for your time, and hopefully until the next
one. Go and see your local politicians.
Yeah.
Go and see them. Put pressure on them. Write letters to the the usual stuff. Letters to the newspaper.
Yes.
Social media.
Kevin, sorry, National Party for 100 years. And do you
Oh,
think
yeah,
we've
I
got any hope?
All right, look, I
great.
better go. I see my wife waiting in. Okay,
Thank you.
it's
Thank
been
you very
wonderful to
much
meet with
indeed.
you, and thanks for sharing those stories. They're precious.